Good afternoon, Huskies, and welcome to the first installment of our Elevate Career Hacks online professional development workshops. Happy New Year, and my name is Josh Prue, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at the UConn Office of Alumni Relations, and I'll be your moderator today. On behalf of the UConn Foundation, we're excited for today's discussion. Today's presentation will feature a slate presenter of our normal rotation through career hacks. John Brady is the executive director and principal of Pro-Tem Partners, UConn alumni's preferred resource for career and management consulting. Today's topic of influence without direct authority is one that is applicable in any workplace, and also as we've seen the increase in need for a lot of organizations of all sizes that are either growing in hierarchical trends or to some degree finding themselves flattening out, this topic seems to resonate with many of us. Before we begin, as always, we want to make sure that you know of the key areas of note for participating in today's webinar. Number one, there will be an opportunity to ask questions by typing them into your question box on your control panel. Feel free to type them in as you think of them, and we'll address as many as we can throughout the program and in summation at the end of the presentation. Number two, a survey will be sent to you as a follow-up. We would appreciate if you can take some time to fill out this survey so we can continue to bring the type of programming and webinars that you'd like to be seeing. Third, this webinar will be recorded. So later this week, please make sure you visit youtube.com/UConn alumni sometime, as I mentioned, later this week to see this and other presentations as they are done throughout the year. Lastly, as we will review at the close of this presentation today is the first of 22 events nationwide that are recurring between today until February 6th that are tied to our month-long initiative series entitled Elevate Your Career Next Level. This series works to provide opportunities to enhance career trajectory by featuring recruiters, career experts, entrepreneurs, C-level individuals, and industry experts that can share their insight and experience that you also share in your fellow Husky alumni community. This program works to provide unique and exclusive access to venues and personnel in a variety of industries, and we're lucky enough today to have one of those career experts with us. I'd urge you to check out the full slate and calendar of events, both happening in person regionally throughout the country, as well as online by visiting the letter S as in sam.uconn.edu/the numbers 505. That's s.uconn.edu/505 for the entire Elevate schedule that's happening this month. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter. John Brady, or JB to his friends, is an executive coach, keynote speaker, and frequent media source on matters related to corporate and career performance. Mr. Brady's current and recent clients span the United States, the United Kingdom, including other countries, as well as including senior managers and executives of Goldman Sachs, GE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Apple, Shell, Aramark, Hess, Southwest Air, AstraZeneca, Comcast, IBM, UBS, Thomson Reuters, and including the federal government, among many others. Mr. Brady is a 25-year veteran of the education, banking, and technology sectors with experience growing top-rated talent and top-line revenue of startups, family-owned businesses, nonprofits, as well as Fortune 50 companies. Holds a Bachelor of Science degree in English education and a Master of Education in Leadership, Training, and Policy Studies, both from the School of Education at Boston University. He also holds a Master's of Business Administration with a concentration in Marketing and International Business from the Olin Graduate School at Babson College. Babson also recognized him as a distinguished alum in 2006. John currently resides in Bryan, Texas with his husband, Trent, and he has been working with us for a number of years now and considered an honorary Husky in our eyes, and we welcome him to today's presentation. Again, John, thanks so much for taking some time. I know that you and I are hitting the road shortly, so this is one of many presentations we're going to be working together on this week.
Yes, Josh, you and I will be spending an incredible amount of time together, but it's fun every year and meeting with everybody around the country. And this was certainly a great way and a great place to start. It always feels a little weird hearing someone read my bio. One of these days I might actually get used to it. But everybody, the happiest of New Year's to you. I hope you had a wonderful holiday if you celebrated with family, with friends, with family of choice, and that you're set up to have a wonderful new year professionally, personally, and in all things. Jumping right into our content for today, I spend all of my time doing really one of two things: helping people find their next job, finding their next position, whether they're currently employed or not, and helping folks work their way through and navigate the organizations that they work in ways that accelerate their career trajectory, get them the kinds of roles and positions that they want. There's a lot of things that we learn in school. There's a lot of things that we don't necessarily learn in school. Organizations can be complicated as all human relationships are, and anything that enables people to navigate that better usually means a lot more in terms of overall salary and compensation, but most importantly, whatever sense of fulfillment that you're able to glean from your work. And one of the topics that comes up as a running theme in almost all of the engagements that I do with clients on really both tracks, whether people are looking for their next thing or focusing on the organizations they're in, is influencing others in whatever way. And with organizations being so flat, it's very rare that people have direct responsibility or supervisory experience in the same hierarchical way that many of us generationally may have been used to previously. Organizations are very flat. And just to kind of define my terms for a moment as we go forward, if I ask people what the difference is between direct and indirect authority, it's interesting if you really press folks. Usually they'll talk about an org chart, they'll talk about the reporting lines, and just remember that where you fall in an organizational chart, or whether or not you are specifically considered a project lead or hold a certain title, isn't ultimately what gets you what you need from other people. If I really press folks who attend content like this, what they consider to have direct oversight or authority versus not, eventually you get to things that are around the ability to hire, terminate, promote, just complete someone's performance evaluation, determine what their raise will be for the year, those kinds of things. Stuff that is really kind of old school, which is really kind of funny to me, given that most of the folks who are in workplaces seldom work in places that have that many people they're working with that fall into that old school hierarchical structure. At the end of the day, almost everything that we do in any environment, in the workplace or outside of it, is really primarily based on relationships. And unfortunately, when people then think of the next level of this, as they say, well, it really comes down to, you know, office politics or power centers in organizations. And unfortunately, those words, particularly when people talk about office politics, it usually comes with a negative connotation. There's an assumption that office politics are bad, that it's something that is a distraction from core work, that the work that we do should stand on its own in terms of its quality and or just generally the quality of work output, I suppose. And unfortunately, most people are so busy dealing with so many different competing priorities, people competing for their time, emails and instant messages and meetings that never seem to end. It can be really difficult to get people's attention and get what you need from them, because most of us are moving so fast that we're sacrificing the important on the altar of the urgent. There's a quote that I'll share with you, it was written by Marshall Goldsmith in Harvard Business Review, probably about 15 years ago, give or take, and I think it really holds true today in just about every organization. Every decision in your company is made by the person who has the power to make that decision, not necessarily the right person, not necessarily the smartest person, not necessarily the best person. If you can influence the key decision makers in your organization, you can have a positive difference. You can make a positive difference. If you can't influence decision makers, you obviously make much less of a difference. Once you make peace with this, you become more effective influencing up. So while all of the suggestions that we'll talk about here in the next few minutes don't come with any sort of a guarantee, you can control what you can control, you can influence what you can influence. You're not always going to win in just about any effort. These aren't silver bullets, but anything that I think bends the odds in your favor can have a positive difference for you and for your work and the things that you're being evaluated on. So in the case of something like office politics, I try to tell folks, rule number one is it's really just influence by another name. Most importantly, they're just really relationships. And when I hear about office politics from clients, the only thing that I really want to know is, are those office politics healthy or unhealthy? What, granting and receiving of favors, helping people out, the extent to which that you express interest in other people's lives and their work within appropriate boundaries. Those are the things that most people, I think, fall short in because they're often so busy. And what I encourage folks to do is be as deliberate about that stuff as you can, because particularly in flat organizations, but even in more hierarchical ones, influence in any structure is omnidirectional, meaning it isn't just up and down. It's not just a pyramid. It's laterally, it's diagonally. It might be working with an executive who oversees a completely different division, but is a peer to your boss, and therefore navigating all of those relationships. Occasionally, actually more than occasionally, it's not uncommon for levels to get skipped where you're talking to someone who's your boss's boss or even 2 levels senior, and navigating who's supposed to know what, when, is not always easy to do. And there's no one answer because the norms vary from organization to organization. But really do focus as much as you can on relationships, because the only way that you have influence in organizations is based on whatever currency you bring into it. When you're trying to convince anybody in your organization to do anything, whether it's convincing someone to give you information that you need in order to complete a project or get a report done on time, whether it's trying to get budget appropriated to do something, permission to do something, a new initiative launched, whatever it is, you're selling an idea. And the problem with the way most people sell anything, but especially sell ideas, is they tend to focus too much on the things that matter to them as opposed to the things that matter to the person they're supposed to be selling this idea to. Anything that you're doing in the workplace, anything that you need to get, you want to be speaking about it in the currency in the person that you're speaking to. So one way to get at this, and I tell people to do this as often as possible, it's a good idea for you to make a habit of knowing what the people around you, including your boss or bosses if you're reporting to more than one, are being held accountable for. What are the goals and objectives that they're going to be evaluated on in 90, 180 days, 365, or even 12 to 24 months? They may not be willing to, nor should they necessarily share with you things like their professional development goals. There may be some proprietary things that they can't share with you, but at a high level, usually they can share with you what it is that their higher ups are expecting of them. And again, I mentioned your boss, and that can be sometimes comfortable conversation to have, but you always want to be thinking about your work in the context of people around you. Because anytime that you can get a twofer where you're able to get someone else what they need as well as what you need, you've deepened a relationship in a way that's more likely to get you throughout the year all the stuff that you need to get done, or new ideas or initiatives that you want to bring forward. You have to be careful about how you ask those things, and when you ask for it, it's one thing, one-on-one to ask your boss that kind of question, but if it's someone who's more of a peer in another department, that's probably not something you want to lead with as an opener if it's not somebody that you know initially. But as you're getting to know people around you, it's a pretty good idea to know what types of things they need to get done, and any opportunity you have to help them with that, or if something that you need can also help them with achieving their objectives. That's going to tell you not only how to sell your idea, how to communicate your idea, but who you should bring that idea to and who you should be gleaning support from. Generally speaking, folks tend not to think about the overall cost of whatever it is that they're asking for. And cost doesn't just mean money. It can translate to money, and it's often things like staff time and whatnot, which does ultimately have a cost. But whenever you're trying to communicate the value of an idea or something that you need, make sure that you're being realistic about the impact on another person. If it's not things like money and time, if there's something that you're relying on someone else for as part of a project, a deliverable that you need to get by a certain date or on time because it's a dependency of some kind, be realistic about what it takes for them to get that to you in light of their work. If there's a way for them to get a data set, perhaps because there's another data set that they need to pull and they can pull them at the same time, or if there's something that you're needing that's all extra work for that individual, you need to really factor that stuff in. You need to know what the cycle of their work is. If it's their busiest time of year, it's probably a good thing to know when those peak periods are, so that when that deliverable is supposed to come to you and that input for you is supposed to come in, you've accounted for the time in the schedule. To just say, hey, I know this is when you're busiest is at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year. How much time do you need? And if you've done that in advance, not only have you shown that you understand their work, but you've given them a little bit of breathing room and you've avoided a potential deadline problem for yourself. And you're not going to know that stuff usually unless you've invested some time in getting to know how their outcomes and their work cycles go. Whenever you are trying to sell an idea on somebody, when I say be realistic about the pros and cons, most things don't deliver on all of their potential values. The potential value of an opportunity, and then there's where it ends up. For example, if I'm working in sales and I want to tap a new market, I can talk about the roughly $1.5 billion that is available out there theoretically, but realistically, I'm not going to be able to probably close 100% of that $1.5 billion market. It's probably going to start in much smaller percentages and grow over time. If I can give a sense of both and market share and base it on something and on a timeline that makes some sense, and if I can list specifically the assumptions that I used saying why we ought to go into that market and in that direction, executives are much more likely to buy into it. Make sure that you also know the language of the person that you're talking to, not just their goals and objectives. For somebody maybe more junior in the workplace, it can be very difficult to get on the short list of names for people to go to certain professional development events like conferences. And, it's nice to get on an airplane and go to a nice hotel somewhere and hopefully learn a few things. But your professional development is generally seen as your responsibility. In most organizations, all of that travel is seen ultimately as an expense, and there's a lot of people who want to do those things. So the fact that it advances your development, makes you better at your job, is a little too abstract. That might work for some managers, but ideally, if there's content that you're able to bring back, thoughts that you're able to bring back, those are things that are much more likely to gain resonance. Here's presenting not just the overall cost to attend the event, for example, but even a preliminary outline of what you'd want to be able to make available to other people on the team so that the knowledge and the development isn't just yours, but something that benefits everybody, or talking to other folks or vendors about what they're doing, bringing that information back in a way that's shareable in a meaningful way and distilled in a meaningful way, rather than just kind of writing up a report and putting all of the notes out for everybody, making sure that you know what's important for the right audiences and being able to kind of pre-package that, if you will, before you go, shows that you've put a lot of thought into it. For somebody more senior, in talking to executives, it might be more about the valuation of the company. Particularly, if you work in a giant publicly traded company, it's probably less likely, but most of us work in places that are mid-size, and depending on who the investors, the owners are, private equity firms, whatever, the language, or I say the love language of investors is overall valuation, EBITDA, discounted cash flows. If whatever you're trying to do, whether it's enter that new market or expand the use or bring in consultants, something to leverage your CRM system or whatever it is, whatever analytics or data or support you're trying to get, if you can speak to it in those terms, the terms that they're having conversations with their board about, or with their higher ups about, with analysts about, then it's much more likely to at least get heard at a more substantive level. And it also demonstrates that you know the language of the higher ups in your organization. And that's something that happens very rarely. Just make sure that you own the outcomes of whatever it is that you end up proposing, even if it doesn't go well. And sometimes it won't. Folks, usually if there's a problem, there's I think just a primal tendency to kind of avoid owning something that has gone sideways for whatever reason. In most organizations, there are organizations where this isn't safe to do, but in most places, it's going to be pretty self-evident what works and what doesn't. And you need to know for yourself what culturally is acceptable on the risk continuum of any organization that you work in, but feel comfortable owning the results for things that go well and following up on those results. Just because it goes smoothly doesn't mean that anyone really understands the value of it. Just because something didn't go wrong doesn't mean that people understand the value of it. If what used to take 6 people in one department 20 minutes to do over and over and over again in any repetitive process, and now it takes 13, that just saved a lot of staff time, which translates into saving a lot of dollars. And it's probably reducing errors and other things. You can estimate within a factor what some of those things are, and make sure that when you're doing things like your self-evaluation at the end of the year, you can mention it in there without going out and singing the successes to all of the world and making it look like you're being overly self-promoting in the wrong places. But documenting that stuff in the right places and in the right ways can be especially helpful. But in most organizations, if people are aware of what the risks were, and if you've put the pros and cons out there up front and been realistic about the potential costs, no matter the outcome, sort of the ideal, the less than ideal, in the middle of the road, then people are ready for it. And it's somehow it's been accounted for in people's calculus of what expectations they can hope to see on the other end. Overall, generally, when you're interacting with your colleagues, this is stuff I tend to think about over time. But in all of your conversations, but particularly serious discussions about, even if it's just 2 or 3 minutes, reminding somebody about that one thing that you need, or giving a proposal in a meeting, whether it's a regular standing staff meeting or the chance that you have to pitch it to the decision makers. Think really carefully about your overall leadership presence, no matter what level you're at. Most people have not spent time thinking about their body language and nonverbals. Their eyes are going all over the place, and they might be nervous, they might be looking at their notes. Make eye contact with people. If there's a room of several people or even a whole bunch of people, be scanning the room, be scanning their faces. It makes a difference. People notice that. If you find out, ask for feedback whenever you're presenting. I found out when I used to guest lecture a lot at my alma mater, and I found out from one of my former faculty members. She told me, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you tend, when you pace around the room, to pace to one side of the room. You always go to the left. And I wasn't really aware of that, and it's a small thing. But if you're in that auditorium, the people on one side of the room probably feel like I'm more engaged with them than the people on the other side of the room. And that's a problem in an instructional setting. I wasn't even conscious of it, but it was something that was pointed out to me. We all have little idiosyncrasies, filler words like I still try to break that habit myself. It's what we tend to do when we don't know what to say, or whether when we're thinking about the next thing. In Western society, we're terrible about pauses. Pauses are totally okay. We tend to fill them. There are words that people will use repetitively, not aware that they're using them repetitively. If you're able to record yourself presenting, or you're able to get feedback, it can be uncomfortable. But the more you know stuff like that, the better that and more deliberate you can be when you're trying to make sure that you're communicating to other people what it is that you need from them. How you dress really matters. The workplace, most places are casual. There are still some environments where people still dress up to go to work, but they're definitely fewer in number. Most organizations have gone at least to corporate casual, and certainly in a lot of other environments, it's just casual, period. I usually tell most of my clients, make sure to dress one step up from whatever the norm is, not just when you're presenting, but just generally. So if it's a casual work environment, maybe go kind of corporate casual. A suit would be overkill, but you want people to see you professionally. And most of us are visual. It's just human nature, and it's mostly subconscious. But making sure that you're still dressed in such a way that is while comfortable and that still fits and doesn't seem out of place, just naturally gives you that extra little bit of gravitas and respect. Be really mindful of how you use technology. When you're with people in a room face to face, this is not just a generational thing, by the way. I feel like the younger professionals get blamed for this all the time, and it's really pretty universal. Folks are constantly scanning every device that's buzzing and beeping and whatever. You need to be really, really present, which gets back to things like your nonverbals, your eye contact. People know when they're being listened to, and people really need to feel as though they're heard. And they're not going to feel that if you're taking that 1 second to even just close out the window that kind of pops up on your phone screen or on your tablet or whatever. Just make sure that those distractions are taken away so that the person in front of you knows that what you're asking for is really important, that they are really important, and that this is a discussion that is important. Because quite frankly, if it's not important, you probably shouldn't be having the conversation or making the ask anyway. But be really, really thoughtful about that stuff. Most conversations are mere minutes, and you can go without the technology for that amount of time, no matter what they do. Just make sure that you're limiting the number of distractions that you have. The only thing when you're talking to somebody about this idea that really matters is the person with whom you're speaking. Mirroring is a concept of taking into account the way in which other people interact, the level of formality or the level of maybe casual nature and colloquial nature in which they communicate. By mirroring, don't take that too literally. That doesn't mean artificially adopting the accent of the person that you're talking to or using the exact same words necessarily that they're using. But there's a level of discourse that sometimes changes. Some people tend to be more formal in certain conversations. Others will be a little bit more casual. Always maintain your professionalism, but feel free to adjust so that people are comfortable. If somebody's speaking in a way that tends to be more conversational, you don't want to be too formal because you just create a distance between the two of you. And if you have somebody who's tending to be more formal for whatever reason, you may want to just elevate the vocabulary that you're choosing in the conversation. Make sure to learn the art of storytelling, particularly with data, whether it's learning how to visually represent data, share information. There's a tendency to word vomit for most folks when they're trying to pitch an idea. Sometimes it's just nerves and anxiety, but I think there's also the desire of most people to share everything or only selectively share and leave out the stuff that may not give a more comprehensive picture. Get really good at helping people follow you on a journey. That doesn't mean it's a long presentation. Storytelling can be something that takes place in just 2 or 3 minutes and can be very impactful and put people in the right mindset. Usually, if there's something that you need, there's a before and an after. And if you've held to my first rule, which is being that you want to speak in the language and to the value system and the needs and the goals and objectives of the person that you're making asks of and that you're pitching things to. And if you've done that right, you want to make sure that before and the after is in their language, but that you've also taken them on that journey a little bit. You want them to be able to imagine that next state of affairs, even though it might be something kind of small, even if it's saving X number of minutes on process time for anything that is a repetitive cycle, or additional revenue, or certain savings, or whatever that something is, or inviting them to co-author or co-present the findings of something that you've put together so that you share the stage with them so that they're getting a chance to be, but whatever that something is, you want them to be able to visualize it, but in a way that's going to be positive. And most folks don't necessarily do that. And even with data, some folks can cut right through a spreadsheet really fast and the numbers jump right off the page for them, but most of us need some kind of visual. So if you can present that information concisely, all the better. When you use PowerPoint slides, unfortunately, in many organizations get used like Word, and they just get filled with far too much. There's far too much text. Wherever you can have graphics, wherever you can use sentence fragments, wherever you can limit, think about whether or not each bullet point really is relevant and how much of it is relevant to convey an idea. And get used to keeping it brief. This is not something that I'm always good at. I constantly have to practice it. Quarter of a century in the professional world, and I just talk too darn much. So whenever I go in for a presentation or I have to have a really important conversation, there's a level of practice that I have to go through to chop content out. I do it when I write also, and I've learned to make it work for me. I just get all my ideas out. If it's something that needs to be a page or two, I'll write 5 pages. I'll go with my nature because I know that's how I get all my best stuff. And then I get really relentless about editing and leave more than half of it on the cutting room floor. Make sure that you're giving the information that's powerful, that's relevant, and only that which is relevant, because time is really at a premium. And even when it's not at a premium, you only get people's attention for so long. So you just want to be really deliberate about that. When I used to work in sales, whenever I had sort of the big final presentation where I knew the decision was going to get made, I would drill it over again and again and again. And I was constantly trying to get it to about half of what the target was, because things usually don't go the way you plan. And since people tend to run late, especially more senior people, because their calendar gets really stacked, if I've got a 30-minute meeting, I'm only going to assume I have about 10 or 15 minutes, and there's certainly plenty to cover. If there's a lot of Q&A, then I can cover that, but I really try to prepare for a lot less, and then it flows a little bit more naturally. And I'm just going to keep drilling this because it requires some practice. We live in our own reality. We live in our own heads. We live in the first person. Remind yourself again and again and again, what can I do today to be more conscious of somebody else's point of view, even when you don't know how you're going to use it yet. It's better for you to understand the organization, what people are doing, find out what's coming like. It's far more valuable to an organization if they restructure or understand the interconnectedness and cross-functional sorts of things. The better you're likely to navigate over constantly thinking, whether it's having coffee or lunch with somebody, walking to the train station with somebody, if you're in a big city, just those little tiny fragments of time where you can get a sense of what's going on in their professional world will matter. And generally, whether it's in verbal language or in PowerPoint slides or in reports or in proposals, whatever it is, if you're overall more folks in front of you, less distracted by keep coming by, knocking on your door, the devices that are buzzing, all of that, you'll find that even if you're in a position of leadership, if you're an executive and you're used to people having to come to you with stuff all the time, you'll find if you are able to do that, the junior people who come to you, they just, it's almost just an automatic human nature. You'll find that they actually start to get more concise, that they actually start taking less time on the calendar. They just, so what it is that is relevant information for you to give or reflect them and applies pretty much to everybody. And all of this just gets back to the long game. You know, influence is kind of like credit score, relationship and score. It's something that's hard to change very abruptly. You know, the more that you're able to do all the right things over time, people remember it. When I launched my practice 7 or 8 years ago, it was 20 years of favors, many of which I had forgotten I had ever done, that really got me going, and that got me my first clients, and that quite frankly kept me afloat and helped me pay my mortgage and keep a roof over my head and build it to what it is today. People have surprisingly long memories for the good and the bad, and often those investments that you make in other people, as long as you're able to get your core work done, yield incredible results over the long term. Believe me, it really, really works. The one piece of this that's left is what happens when something, all of your efforts, it's not working. You're not getting what you need. Now, when it's coming from management, there's only so much you can do. It might be that you still need to work on your game. It could just be that you're in an organization where you're not going to get what you need, and it's time to move on. Those things can happen. But when you're working more with peers or colleagues at varying levels, the question naturally comes in, when do you escalate something? You know, when do you try to solve a problem with somebody, whether it's something that you need, or report something that's gone terribly wrong? Those sorts of things. I like people to be very thoughtful, because you can't unring the bell. If you escalate something to someone higher up, it's not something that you can take back again. And you want to be able to solve things, of course, on your own when you can, but you can also make the mistake of solving for the wrong thing. And the answer is not to always CC everybody on every piece of communication, rather to be thoughtful. So anything that needs to escalate in really broad terms, if you're running into anything that is a potential ethical issue or a legal issue, something that could be a PR problem that has a really high cost for whatever reason, that's the kind of thing that you should probably escalate if you're running into a brick wall. That stuff it can be really serious. Many organizations, if you're in financial services or a publicly traded company or any regulated industry, usually one of the things that you do, in addition to signing off on the employee manual that you've read it, even if you haven't, is on any conflict of interest policy or the company's ethics policies. That stuff is real and it really matters. So anything that could be an issue there, you want to make sure you're communicating what's relevant and as efficiently as soon as you can, as soon as you know it. There's certain things that you want to be able to communicate in terms of what's important. How long has it been a problem? Who or what could the impact be, assuming that you know? It may be something that is kind of more of an internal thing, but there could be some downstream implications, something that may not be an issue for like 6 months or 7 months. But if you're aware of the ripple effects and who has to touch certain things later on, people having a heads up can be the difference between, oh, yeah, well, that's not going to be fun, but at least we're ready for it, to why the heck didn't you tell me about this? The earlier conversation is collaborative. The latter one is not one you ever want to be on the wrong side of. If there's something that's just a simple mistake, or somebody just naturally missed something, mistakes happen. Human beings run organizations and are in organizations. There is no perfect place to work. Things go wrong. Projects go sideways. Stuff doesn't go the way that you want. But if there's a pattern of something versus something that's kind of episodic, you want to give people a line of redemption if at all possible, because sometimes, in fact, inevitably, the person who makes that error is at some point going to be you. I can guarantee it. It's certainly been me, and those weren't easy days to get through. But by communicating things up front, things go. I had a boss a number of years ago who once said, the one thing I can always rely on is that I'm never going to be surprised by anything that comes from your area of responsibility. The only way I don't hear about it from you is if you didn't know about it yourself. And that was stated as a compliment. If the people around you know they can rely on you to let them know when something is worth worrying about, and when nothing to see here, we've got it, and be accurate about it, then it's gonna give you tremendous influence in the organization for all things that you need, small and even large. There is stuff that isn't relevant when you're escalating something and you need to go to somebody, whether it's your boss or somebody else's. Please don't editorialize in any way. No, but everybody's got problems in the workplace. They really don't want to hear about how fed up you are. By the time something gets escalated, usually there's a level of frustration that people are experiencing, all perfectly understandable. Don't share it, and it's okay to maybe state it, but really it's not. It's something that they've got their own issues to worry about. You really want to leave that out of it. Stick to the facts overall and avoid any commentary. And as with all things, just be succinct. Make sure that you're conveying enough concern so that they understand that you're looking out for the good of everybody in the organization and not settling scores or looking to make anybody look bad. You just want to make certain that you're able to get what you need to help everybody else get what they need and be successful with everybody. And you'll find that people in management, generally speaking, they're able to get they can surmise most of the details. The high level context is generally all they need, and what you can see as the potential impact or the exact impact if you happen to know it. They've usually got enough wherewithal to be able to fill in the rest. And for a webinar, I mean, those are just some of the high level things that I try to tell folks. Most of the time people really want silver bullet answers. They want little tricks that they can do. And all that stuff is really very contextual. I just tell people context is my favorite word, and I use it a lot in the specifics with folks when they're asking me about how to handle something like this at work, good, bad, or indifferent. But if you do this stuff, you're going to really overall find that people are much more likely to say yes to the overwhelming majority of things that you want, that you need, that you'd like to see advance and push forward for the good of your own career as well as the good of the organization. The hard part, I didn't tell anyone on this call anything that you probably don't know already, but if you can be more deliberate about it, if you be more conscious about it, if you can think about it at least once a week, who am I talking to? How am I talking to people? How am I engaging with people? How am I asking for this thing? How am I following up on this? Just that activity alone and seeing it through makes a huge difference in how much influence and even power you end up having in any organizational structure and in any group. I'm going to end it there. If there are questions, I'll try to answer them to the extent I can in a generic way, but I know Josh also probably has some announcements as well. Josh, I'm going to turn this back over to you and let me know when you want me to share the announcement slides.
Great, thanks, John. Why don't we start there and give some folks some time if they have some questions that they want to go ahead and type those into the question box right now. It should be on your toolbar under the questions. Just go ahead and type your question in there and we'll sift through the ones that come in. So John, if you want to advance to those announcement slides, we'll do that really quickly. So as mentioned earlier, we are in the midst of Elevate Your Career Next Level, our month of career and professional development. We have 22 events nationwide. There are 3 that are currently ongoing online. So you have one today, another one on Thursday on resume tips, as well as one later on in the month on leveraging your LinkedIn. All key areas that, the little things really matter and making sure that your presence and your personal brand are out there and in the right way. Additionally, as I mentioned, 19 events from Connecticut all the way to California, going all the way from the CEO of TaylorMade Golf, proud alum of UConn, out there in San Diego doing an event for us. Next week, we have events in Denver with the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Vail Resorts, another proud alum. We are doing an inside access to Kraft Heinz corporate headquarters in Chicago next week with some alums that are there, as well as in Philadelphia next week. We're doing a collaborative program with our colleagues from the University of Rhode Island on careers in sports. So if anybody has interest there, some great programs ahead, and that's just kind of a snapshot. As we mentioned, John, thank you very much. The next program that's coming up is a resume tune-up on Thursday this week. So feel free to sign up for that webinar or career hack program by visiting uconalumni.com/events. And believe it or not, John, we've had 0 questions come in that time frame. So either you covered it all, or you're going to expect a lot of follow-up emails.
Yeah, or it was awful. And either way, thanks everybody for your time. It seems weird to say 2020. It's really here. But I wish everyone tremendous success in all of their pursuits, professional and otherwise. And for those of you Husky alums that we're going to see as we travel around the country over the course of the next 4.5 weeks, we look forward to seeing you in person.
We did get one last-minute question, if you've got 1 second, John.
I do. Go ahead.
All right. So the question here, or the statement, is office politics can influence your career growth. Besides letting your work speak for itself, and what other advice that you might have for influencing others to a new view of your own abilities?
I'm sorry, Josh, say the last part of that sentence again.
Sorry about that. Office politics can influence career growth. So the person is looking for new ways to influence others to viewing your abilities in a new way.
Part of the reason that I made the recommendations that I did in getting to understand other people's work is it does 2 things. On the surface, while you're getting information about what other people do, generally speaking, as you converse about somebody else's reality, they start to see how your work can interact and intersect with theirs. So it becomes kind of a mutual self-interest exercise, if you will. And I think that's the most comfortable for people. If your work doesn't always, you want your work to be of the highest quality. And in an ideal world, you want it to be able to stand on its own and speak for itself to the extent that it can. But as is implied in the question, since it can't always, the reason I make the recommendations that I do is this does help people see your value and your contributions in new ways, because most people see a job title. They see a job function. They see the person who is responsible for these conference and events, or for this pre-sales process, or overseeing this section of a call center. I mean, the list goes on and on. We are way more than our job titles, and most of us do a lot more than what our job title confers. And I think if you have those conversations with any depth, even just 20-30 minutes, people start to realize that your work naturally touches theirs in some way, and that is where your value and the nature of your work starts to shine in a way that nobody else is doing, because folks do that very rarely. What most professionals do all day is they have a screen in front of them and they answer emails, they put PowerPoint slides together, they do whatever analysis in Excel spreadsheets that they need to do, they write whatever reports, and they attend whatever meetings. And that's about as far as they take it, because there's so much coming in at them that they never spend any time going out. And the very purpose of these suggestions is to make sure that people start to see you, both your overall intellect, your humanity, that sort of human relationship, and the ways in which most organizations have a level of interconnectedness, and therefore how your work relates to theirs.
Thank you, John. Last and final question we'll take for today comes in, and how is it that you are able to determine who has the authority to implement the change that you're recommending? Oftentimes, organizations can be very hierarchical, and obviously understanding who the right person is comes with a little bit of skill. So any recommendations there, John?
Do a lot of listening. Do a lot more listening than speaking. I guarantee you'll find out. I'm going to make an assumption in answering this question, because if you're new to an organization, unfortunately, the only way to find out is to ask, because there's a lot of things that you just haven't picked up as sort of an unconscious awareness of yet. And if you are new to an organization, the fact that you're new usually allows you to ask questions because you're the new person without it politically costing you anything. So if we make the assumption that it's an organization that you've been in for at least a little while, maybe not, a lifer, but just someone who's been around a year or two or more. If you want to find out who's influencing certain decisions, the answers are usually found in subtle things that you'll pick up on. For example, who sits in on what meetings? If there are meetings around, I don't know, if there's a big initiative taking place, is this someone who tends to be included in those conversations? Then anything that's strategic or that involves more long-term planning and analysis is something that they probably have some level of influence over, if not outright control. If you notice that meetings that tend to be more technical and you see who's on the invite request or on a lot of places, the conference room assignments and reservations will have attendee information in it. Stuff that tends to be more systems and more technical, you'll see those folks listed. If you see that someone's on agendas associated with certain types of things around whatever it is, finance or tech or ops or training issues or whatever, that'll give you a clue. And generally speaking, most bosses are pretty good about sharing that information, but I would be a good listener, and by listener, I mean just an observer. Those things will usually give away who really has the authority, the power, the influence, the political clout, whatever, to get something done, as opposed to what the org chart says.
All right, thank you very much, John. And thank you to everybody who stayed and joined us. Again, make sure you check out the full slate of events at s.uconn.edu/505. And check out all of our Elevate events that are coming up this month. We look forward to seeing you across the country over the next 30 days. And our thanks, as always, to John, who's always the first volunteer to be our guinea pig for our first events over the year. So we are excited to see what he's got on deck for us. And we look forward to seeing everybody over the course of the year. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.